Hi, it's me, Chris Harder, and welcome back to Showboys, the podcast bringing you a glittery, gritty, full frontal glimpse into the world of boylesque. What is boylesque? We're gonna find out. Something I love about performing in New York for the past 13 years is that I get to see so many performers that I first started out with continue to grow and excel in the thing that they love, but also the stuff that they're really fucking good at. And, unfortunately, that is just not the case with my guest today. It's pretty bad. Just kidding. This person is not only a show boy, he's a showgirl, a show pony, a producer, a designer, a seamstress of seismic proportions and paillettes. Sometimes he's a tall drink of a jolly green giant. Other times he's a crusty crustacean or a pulchritudinous purveyor of low chairs and high heels. He's toured his special blend of comedy and charisma across the US and the far corners and crevices of the world, and he was crowned Mr. Exotic World in 2014 at the Las Vegas Burlesque Hall of Fame, baby. Please welcome to the Showboys stage, Mr. Gorgeous.
Oh my God, what an intro. Everyone always says that on the podcast. They're like, oh, Chris, the intros are just my favorite. Can I please have that? So what an intro. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Have you been listening to the pod?
Of course I have. They're great.
That's not a trick question. If you haven't, it's totally fine.
No, I have. I'm also like creeping on everybody else to be like, okay, what are they saying about boylesque? So I can, just hear all the nitty gritty. But I mean, fabulous podcast and wonderful guests so far. I've been loving it.
Well, thank you. How are you doing today?
Yeah. I'm great. Another hot day in the city. So can't complain. Enjoying the summer. How about you?
I'm good. I mean, all things considered, I'm fine. I know. Well, you know what? Let's just address the elephant in the room. We are recording this podcast for the second time because I've been on I won't say a personal journey, but I will say a sound design journey that is making my personal life really difficult. but I'm happy we're here.
Yeah.
Since we are doing this the second time, I wanted to throw in a couple of new questions. And I was just wondering, do you know what the word pulchritudinous means?
I have no clue. But it sounds like something you don't want to catch.
I know, right? It means beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
How about that?
Was it from back in like the oldie timey days when people had like wooden teeth and like it just sounds like gnarly, Oh, she's so pulchritudinous. It means like, she's rough around the edges, but as good as we can get.
Right. Yeah, it was a way of saying she has a beautiful heart. Yeah. Old wooden teeth, pegged leg lady. So you grew up in Baltimore. I know I asked you this last time. I'm trying to find a new creative spins. What was it like growing up in Baltimore? And actually, first off, can you privy us to a Baltimore accent?
Oh, you want me to talk about going to get in the water on a hot day? It's that whole like gritty, like, what are you doing? That kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know. The Baltimore accent, I had no clue. First of all, accent sounds like it's like such a glamorous, the French accent or whatever, Italian accent. The Baltimore accent is like, armpit. I never even realized until I left Baltimore that I had that like accent, for lack of a better word. But yeah, growing up in Baltimore was wonderful. I also didn't pick up on the fact that like, all the lunch ladies had the hairnet and the accent, and they'd smack the mashed potatoes and like get up in line. It was like I didn't realize how much these personalities, specifically I know a lot of like female personalities in my childhood were very much like out of a John Waters film. That just felt very normal to me. But also I grew up right outside of the city, so really like Hamden or even in kind of Fells Point is more that like John Waters vibe, Pink Flamingos situation. So I definitely lived in that neighborhood when I was in college in the city. But growing up, I was kind of right outside of that. But I definitely have the spillover of personalities of that, like, Hamden, downtown Baltimore joy.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I also love that you said the accent is like the armpit of accents because a North Dakota accent, I feel like the North Dakota accent is like the double chin of accents. It's like, oh, Oh gosh, yeah. We just got to get in the car, go to church.
It's the Cracker Barrel of accents.
Yes. Were you aware of Blaze Starr and the 2 O'clock Club when you were growing up, or did that happen later in your career?
I wasn't aware of it until because Baltimore Street were all the not I mean there's still some of them there, but we're all the real, like sex clubs and strip clubs were. Baltimore Street was one of those things growing up where like my parents were like, oh, we would avoid driving it, at all costs.
Mm.
But my dad actually worked right next to Baltimore Street downtown. So when we go to pick him up, or if we'd have to go into the office or whatever, we would drive by, all these clubs like the Hustler Club and a lot of just tiny like circus and a bunch of other like really small little hole in the wall places. So I wasn't really aware of 2 O'clock Club and Blaze Star until I really understood burlesque and got into burlesque and realized it was kind of like right in my backyard, literally.
Yeah, and for people who don't know about Blaze Star, definitely Google her. But she worked and eventually owned the 2 O'clock Club. And also, I was thinking about this as I was going through the questions again, but there are like actually some similarities between you and Blaze Star. I mean, like for example, she made her own costumes. And I know other performers do this too, but if
Sure.
you look at photos of her costumes, they're so intricate, the stitching and the embellishment, they're like really pieces of art. And I feel like you do like every one of your pieces, even if it's like something as, seemingly simple as a leotard, you do all of these overlays and cutouts, and they're just
Oh,
really
well, that's
beautiful.
such a nice compliment. I mean, to be compared to her in any way, shape, or form is such a dream. I actually have, I found it on eBay. This was like 7 or 8 years ago, and I got 3 or 4 original Polaroids of Blaze behind the bar at the 2 O'Clock Club. So I'll have to dig them up and show them to you. But she
Oh my
looks like, even in
God.
this Polaroid, she just looks like a bombshell movie star. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's all, oh my God,
Yeah.
yes, please send me a snapshot. And now maybe your tagline can be Mr. Gorgeous, the Blaze Star of Burlesque.
That's great. Man, I wish I could take that. That's just would be such a generous tag because she was such an incredible woman. But sure, why not?
Yeah, I'm sure it would go over well.
Oh, yeah, no complaints at all.
No. The other Baltimore burlesque performer that I love reading about is Lady Zorro. And you have not heard of Lady Zorro before, is that right?
I haven't, but I heard you mention last time we were chatting. So give me another little like tidbit on her.
Well, the whole thing with Lady Zorro, and I read about her in John Waters' book Role Models, is that when he would sneak into these burlesque strip clubs, she would come out fully nude and basically just threaten the men, all of the straight men. See, that's going to be my tactic now. She would come out fully naked and just get in the face of all the men in a very aggressive way. Like
Right.
there's no strip or tease actually to her acts. There was just full vagina and rage.
But I feel like that's what we all need in our lives. Just like let's cut to the, you know,
Yeah.
point. Yeah, get to the end. Let's go.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, so you can all read up about her in John Waters' Role Models. So I seriously though do want to know about your career. And I know that you eventually went to the New England Center for Circus Arts. What was your journey getting there though? Because you also originally went to school to teach, right?
Yeah, so I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore City, and I got my BFA and my MFA there. So my master's in arts and teaching and my master's of fine arts. And while I was in college down there, I'd always wanted to be. I wish I could have been a performer of some kind. That was always in my mind, and I never knew how I would kind of get there. But circus and theatrical productions were something I always kind of fell in love with. And I had done a lot of like circus stuff when I was a kid. Like I used to go to this organization called the Baltimore Jugglers. My dad would take me twice a week, and it was like all these like old people that would like get together and juggle together.
Oh,
And that was like my activity with my dad because I wasn't really a sports person. So we did that. And, my parents have pictures of me in like sixth and seventh grade juggling like fire in our backyard. So like I was always like a really weird, kind of kid. And when I went to school down there, they had Trapeze School New York had a branch in Baltimore. So I started working for the Trapeze School, and it kind of all went from there. when I was graduating with my master's, I auditioned for a slot in the pro track program at New England Center for Circus Arts, which I actually met up with Topher Bousquet, another wonderful performer there, and Trixie Little and Evil Hate Monkey were also there. And I got in and started training. I trained there for about 2.5 years after college.
Wow. There's so much I want to ask you about there. So, was your father also a circus performer?
No, he was like very much just doing it to do it with me. But we did different kind of like community fair whatever type of things, but it wasn't like, oh, my dad's in the tiger cage now. I can't come to the phone, like not that vibe. But that would have been cool.
Sorry, my dad's in the tiger cage right now. He can't come to the PTA meeting. That's also why have you not juggled fire on stage? I feel like this is prime burlesque material.
I don't know. I just haven't done it in a while. I still have everything, but too many flammable, meltable things in the world of burlesque.
Yeah, also, I mean, I guess this will just become the fire safety podcast, but yeah, it's actually really hard to do fire in New York City, and if the FDA or NYFD catches you, they basically like fine you thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and probably the venue. So I just figure I'll leave that to the pros in whatever other arenas they want to do that.
Yeah, the pros who are, drinking gasoline and spitting it out of their mouths. So you went to circus school. What was the transition then to moving to New York? And then how did you eventually get into burlesque after that?
Yeah, so it kind of happened pretty organically. When I moved to Vermont, which is where it was in Brattleboro, Vermont. Trixie and Monkey had been training there for I think about a year and a half. And I do believe if it's been a while back, but I believe that I actually had seen Trixie and Monkey and had been doing some type of like burlesque circus performing for myself personally, even prior to going to Brattleboro, Vermont.
Mhm.
But being up there with Trixie and Monkey, they were such a kind of fun, colorful, wacky duo, and started doing some costume work for them, started performing with them. There was another guy at the school named Kevin Beverly, who is just like, and still is, an amazing, amazing, amazing physical performer, and has been with, various Cirque du Soleil shows, Seven Fingers, independent circus, companies, and it's just like blows my mind still to this day. But we started doing a doubles acrobatic act together, and we trained duo acro, and we were asked to come to New York and do a acrobatic number for MAC Cosmetics. And we knew at the time that it was a fundraiser like burlesque cabaret show. So we decided to do a bull matador acrobatic striptease, not having really a clue too much of burlesque. I'd heard about it through Trixie and Monkey and seen them, but I didn't really know how to put it into like terms I could hold in my hand, I guess. So we came down, performed. Bob, world famous Bob, was hosting. I believe Dirty was in the show. Tigger was definitely in the show because after our act, he was like, "Oh my God, that was incredible! But you're still wearing something, so like you have to take everything off." And that was like the biggest piece of advice he, well, not ever gave me, but initially gave me, was me understanding that what I was doing was burlesque and kind of I don't want to say rules, but like the framework for what baseline of a burlesque number really is. So that was my introduction into like New York and New York burlesque. And I was so fortunate to work with Tigger, really my first time out of the gate in New York.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with the New York burlesque scene, I feel like Headmistress Joe Boobs will always be there to cut a tag out of your costume, and Tigger will always be there to light your boxer briefs on fire for good and make sure you show that ass.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that show because I think I was in that show too, or I either did it the next
it's
show.
very, very possible. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize that was your first burlesque experience. That's amazing.
Well, it was so I'll put it this way. We had been doing that like acrobatic striptease like for a chunk of time, but I
Sure.
didn't really understand that it was under the category of burlesque. I mean, we were doing shows with Trixie and Monkey in Baltimore and in Brattleboro, but it was more of like a collective show. It wasn't like Trixie and Monkey's burlesque show. It was more of, a cabaret night, and we did our thing and they did their thing. And it wasn't really for me. Well, I also will say this now that I think about it. I think that I wasn't against the idea of burlesque, but I thought that I was doing something that was not above it, but adjacent to it. It was like, well, I'm doing a circus number and, we'll do the whole like take your clothes off thing as like a comedic relief moment. But I
Sure.
never really felt like, to me, the idea was, and I think still the idea is like, well, why am I even taking my clothes off? Like, what's the
Right.
point? Like, is there a reason? There doesn't have to be one, but especially then I was really going back and forth in my mind of like, why would I get naked? Oh, well, if I'm the matador and the bull rips my clothes off, then that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, I love a narrative. You know that.
Sure.
I do think that it's funny you say that because I wanted to ask you this earlier. Sometimes I think there is this Jets versus Sharks kind of street war between circus performers and burlesque performers, but I also think that's kind of imaginary because obviously, like we both know, so many amazing burlesque performers who are also circus artists as well. But do you think there
Sure.
is there this kind of idea that like in the circus one does not need to take their clothes off, or is that
I don't think so. I mean, to be honest with you, I think a lot of circus performers, and this is not a blanket statement, but at least people that aren't working like full time in a show that's a traveling show. Like when I was performing circus for corporate work, which was like performing circus in casinos and nightclubs and special events and whatever it was, the work is inconsistent. And I think that most performers just tend to not do whatever it takes, but if you get a corporate job and someone's like, will you do an aerial performance in your underwear? I think most people are just like, yeah, totally.
sure?
So, yeah, I don't think that there's like a real standoff between the two. I did feel for a little while that I was doing something that wasn't as physically demanding and as like death defying as the person going after me if I was in a circus burlesque combination type show. So
Hmm.
I felt like I had to really acknowledge the power of burlesque and the value of it and not base it on like, oh, well, all the years of physical training that this person can now do a one-armed handstand and put their foot in their mouth. It's like that to me, I realized like has just as much value as someone that has a really clean concept in a burlesque number.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember the first time I saw you thinking, "Oh my God, he is so smooth and funny." It's almost like he rehearsed his act, which at that time was kind of a foreign concept to me personally.
Yeah, right. You have from day one. You have been so clean and so thorough with everything you do. I mean, come on.
Well, thank you. For anyone who has never seen you perform, can you describe your onstage aesthetic as Mr. Gorgeous, and how did that kind of begin to develop for you over the years?
Yeah, so maybe the onstage like personality maybe was guided a lot actually by when I chose the name Mr. Gorgeous because that has a little bit of a background to it as well. Trying to find like a burlesque name is always a challenging thing in my opinion when you hear people talk about it. And my last name is Gorsuch,
Mhm.
not related to Neil Gorsuch, but Gorsuch. And when I was teaching elementary school, one of my kids called me Mr. Gorgeous instead of Mr. Gorsuch as just like a mistake. And it was very funny in the classroom. And the person that was helping me as like my aide in the room, like spilled the beans and told another teacher. And then literally by the end of the week, when they were dismissing kids, even the principal was like, and Mr. Gorgeous, you have a good weekend. So
Oh,
everyone called me when I was teaching elementary school, Mr. Gorgeous. And I think it was actually Trixie that was like, that's got to be your name. That's got to be your name. And I was like, all right, it's kind of like a douchebag name. So I approached everything as like a comedic, nerdy. I don't know if you remember, but I always used to wear these like nerdy glasses, like reading glasses when I performed
yes.
for almost everything. When I did my little tiny chair number, my ice cream number, Superman, all these things that were, I could be a little nerdy and a little silly. So my performance style is always should be seen as very comedic. I don't really do anything that has a serious undertone to it, or it's not often very political forward. I mean, I like to think that the performance does open up conversation in many
Hmm.
ways, but I don't think that I'm trying to hit anyone over the head with a political concept It's more about kind of a lighthearted comedic, we're all in this together to have a nice time type of moment.
Definitely. Well, I think that every time I see your work, I mean, I know we just joked about like harassing and belittling straight men, but I think you do a great job of welcoming everybody to the table. And like if you do poke fun at someone, it's always you always find a way to bring them back into your show.
Well, thanks. I mean, I feel like I think Kitten and Lou, like my burlesque family, have always said they kind of like to use that spoonful of sugar technique, where you have to kind of rope them in and you just give them a little bit as the night goes on, as the act goes on. And I think that it's pretty rare that someone completely shuts out their joy, even if they're like a straight guy watching me perform. I think that the way to kind of get through that barrier isn't to like be aggressive about it. It's more about just the welcoming, hold their hand, poor straight dude or whoever it is, we'll get through it together.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, as you're saying that, I'm just thinking, really, straight men aren't the hardest audience. It's gay men who are actually the hardest audience.
Well, you and I know that very well because how many years ago was it that we used to work at therapy together, performing in Testosterone Thursdays, which I don't know if you want to share a little bit about what people might have seen if they came into that show, but
Yeah, so I was actually going to say, so we used to do the show, like you said, called Testosterone at the now defunct gay club therapy, which I think it's now called Hush. And you can like pay $25 and get a blowjob or something like that. But yes, and I was actually going to ask you, can you describe for the listeners what was a typical night at Testosterone and what could one see on the Testosterone stage?
Oh, sure. Well, there's two things. It's like if this was a film, like I'd like for the camera to go through the audience and see what the audience would see, but then also the backstage was quite interesting because we would usually be dragging our stuff in late at night,
Hmm.
go through the kitchen to downstairs, and with the ceilings being maybe 6 feet tall and my 6'6" body, trying to fit down there. And there were always like two just real straightforward go-go dancers, which most people if you've seen a burlesque show, most burlesque performers will go dance in between a performance or in between during an intermission for tips or just to keep the atmosphere going. But these go dancers were like strictly non-burlesque performing go dancers. So they'd be downstairs doing push-ups and like rubbing one out to get their deal hard for their like, costume of white briefs, or whatever it was.
Lots of pumping and tying off of the dick happening
Yeah.
backstage.
Yeah, which was just, quite a sight. So we were amongst all of that. And then whoever was hosting, which we've had some amazing hosts, host that show, they would often like introduce like the first burlesque performer and bring out one of the go-go dancers and they would go dance to, a 3 or 4 minute song and not take anything off, but just dance on the, stage, which wasn't too big of a stage. So it was kind of like a little go-go box. And then they'd be like, and your next burlesque performer. And then I'd come out dressed as like a crab and I would strip to the Beach Boys Kokomo. So people got a real range of what a burlesque show is and what performance they might see there. It's even hard for me to put into words. It was just such a wild range, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and also I love that show. It really was kind of a burlesque of a burlesque show. Like,
Yeah, very much.
and there were, I mean, some of those hosts, included RuPaul drag superstars like Peppermint, Bob the Drag Queen, Ms. Cracker, Monet Exchange, and I think they got it. But then there would be like a filler drag queen who'd come in, and I feel like this happened to me on more than one occasion. I'd have to follow someone like Francisco, who's like 10 inches soft, and then the drag queen would be like, are you hungry for more dick? Because coming to the stage, it's Chris Harder. And then I come out in like a schoolboy uniform covered in sequins, or,
uh,
yeah.
But you know what I will say? I think that was also a time where we're saying like sometimes the gay audience was the most challenging. It's because it took people a minute to feel comfortable to enjoy it, which
Yeah.
is kind of wild to me. And that's not to say that everyone was a tough nut to crack. Some people were totally into it and really could appreciate it. And other people were there for a totally different visual, which is fine. And also one of the beautiful things, in my opinion, about a burlesque show or a cabaret show, which is if you don't like what you see, wait 4 minutes and it will be over with.
Definitely, yeah, and that's actually a good point too. Maybe I've been too cold-hearted towards those, disenchanted chorus boys, and I need to work on a way of bringing them back into the show. Do you have any memorable audience interactions from doing that, or were there any nights that went like actually very well for you?
In general, I always felt like when I left, and they always used to make you like a good burger or something in the kitchen, and you'd pack up all your stuff and pick up your burger before you left. And there were definitely those nights where I'd be leaving the club and some like person that I felt was giving like cold vibes would be like, oh my God, that was amazing. Or whatever. And it just made me realize, like, not everyone wears their heart on their sleeve and not everyone feels comfortable to cheer. And not even it's odd to say because you're in a space where if you're sitting down for a show, you'd think that you're ready for it and into it. But it's a good example that some people unintentionally have a bit of a poker face.
That is an excellent point. I love that you said that because, yeah, I have to remind myself all the time, like, not to take everything so personally and also to not just be so needy when I go
Yeah.
out.
It's tough because when we say like needy, really, there is not much that beyond getting paid, which is quite a sliding scale and can be great and other times just kind of a drop in the bucket. But there's not much that we like get or ask for in return from performing, money aside, than attention and a call and response to the audience. It doesn't mean that I need to feel like the satisfaction of everyone patting me on the back and congratulating me for everything I'm doing. I'm not doing anything that earth shattering. But when people can acknowledge that it's supposed to be a joyful, fun moment, that for me is like payment as well. When someone can just have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. How'd you get so wise, Mr. Gorgeous? Maybe I'll start calling you Mr. Wise when I introduce you on stage.
Oh, well, yes. I don't know. There's no wisdom here by any means. I think that I just realized, like, after doing, like, we both have done this for probably around the same amount of time, like the New York grind, which is not easy.
Hmm.
I think that there's this idea that, like, New York burlesque people are a little salty or a little thinking that their shit doesn't stink or whatever it is. I've gotten that vibe from some people. And I realize that maybe part of that like harder shelled exterior sometimes can be the fact that, it could be 5 nights a week. You're literally dragging your shit up and down subway steps, getting changed in dressing rooms, if you want to call it that, that are, literally two bar stools and a closet. There's like, it is such a grind. When people say to do like the grind, that's what it is. And I think that I've just learned over the years to like either appreciate it and roll with it or stop doing it, which is why I actually took a bit of a break. I had said to Tigger years ago, I was like, oh, it's just so much work. Da, da, da. And I feel like if I stop, like people are just going to totally forget about me. And he's like, stop thinking so highly. He's like, just calm down. He's like, if you need a break, take a break. He's like, burlesque is going to disappear. And in 3 months, if you want a gig, you get a gig. Doesn't matter. So it was
Yeah.
just one of those things where it's like, if you're not happy, no one is twisting your arm to do this. And there's many other ways to have a creative outlet to financially support yourself. This is not, no one's twisting anyone's arm to do this.
Yes, and that's something I had to remind myself about testosterone too, because I think one night, I don't know, I must have been in a bad mood and I have this act where I do a beer spray on myself and this audience
Yeah.
member, for some reason, I don't know, he looked at me the wrong way and I've never done this before, but I opened the can of beer and sprayed it on him. And in that moment, I was like, okay, Chris, you need to calm the F down and maybe like take a break from this show and like come
Yeah.
back when you're ready, you know?
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, and we've all had those times in different ways. Even times where like collecting when we're working at Slipper Room, collecting tips after you've worked a long night and you're the lucky person that everyone sends you out with the tip bucket, which is actually, in my opinion, really fun because you're able to do a lot more interaction that makes your
Hmm.
second half even more enjoyable. In my opinion, you can talk with people, you can welcome people, you can thank people, you can give them the generosity of like thanking them for coming to the show, which means often they will tip you more and be more
Hmm.
attentive and respect what you're doing. So it's actually, I think it's it's important in many ways to do that. But there are some times where you go out and you ask anyone if they'd like to tip. I'm not forcing anyone to tip. I'm not asking, and you can get some of the most dirty and sour looks from people just asking them to support the show. You have to just acknowledge that probably they're having a bad day for some reason, or that they're a cheap motherfucker, and move on.
Exactly, exactly. One other story I wanted to share about testosterone is one time I went out into the audience and I normally have like these ketchup and mustard bottles that are fake and I pretend to like spray on myself, but I forgot them that night. So I reached to this table and I grabbed the ketchup and mustard that was on the table and I
Oh my
pretended
god.
I pretended to shake it all over the person sitting there, but the caps weren't on. And I
Oh my god.
and I covered porn producer Mark McNamara in ketchup and mustard.
Wow. I mean, but that's now probably like a feature film somewhere. He's like, great idea.
Yeah, exactly. Then he went out and filmed Hot Dog Sunday, so and so's 18 gang bang. Yeah. Well, speaking of exploring other creative interests as well, if anyone follows Mr. Gorgeous, you know that in addition to being a stellar, charismatic, very handsome performer, you're also truly an incredible designer and a costumer and the proprietor of Gorgeous by Gorgeous Designs. You have made costumes for so many boylesque and burlesque performers, as well as several RuPaul's Drag Race superstars like Ben de la Creme, Jinkx Monsoon, and you've been designing on Broadway. When did you first start sewing?
Yeah. Wow. Well, another sweet intro. Thank you to my costuming career. I actually started when I was back at the circus school in Vermont. A lot of corporate circus jobs that you get hired for, they're essentially like, oh, well, here's the theme of the show or theme of the night that this venue is booking. And everyone's going to be in, let's say, gold and black, right? So that usually that corporate client has like a box of gold and black costumes. And they're like, here you go. And I am 6'6". I'm, a bigger guy. So often the costumes wouldn't fit. And I found that like to be marketable and to have the right costumes and the right look, I started making my own things.
Hmm.
Just out of necessity. I never took a sewing class. I still haven't taken a sewing class. I just looked at how things were put together and learned the basics of the machine. My mom taught me like the basics of how to like thread the machine, and this is a zigzag and that's a straight stitch. And it kind of went from there, mostly out of necessity. And then I realized that, my degree in sculpture and fine arts, it was really another way to like create a collage on the human body. And it
Hmm.
was just about working with the body as like a sculptural form, and I really just fell in love with it. It now probably consumes, I'd say, 60 to 65% of my work, the other chunk being performing, which that percentage changes depending on the week or the month.
Yeah, I'm just so impressed, and I can't believe you haven't taken I mean, I can believe you haven't taken a sewing class, but I was just rewatching RuPaul's Legendary All Stars or the Winners All Stars,
Oh yeah.
and and the dresses you made for Jinx Monsoon are so beautiful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's I don't know. I think that it's a good example. I try to remind myself of this, not just when I'm sewing, but when I'm doing, I guess, anything. Sometimes you don't always have to beat yourself up if you don't know the exact right way to do something. Like I couldn't tell you how to properly line a gown, but I line a gown the way that I'm going to do it. Or if I have to put bra cups in or underwires or, whatever it is, I think it's great to have a general understanding, but I've stopped being frustrated that I don't know the
Mhm.
technical way to do it in a couture, French, Parisian, atelier. It doesn't matter to me. This is a visual. It's a costume. It's a sculpture. So yeah, I just keep on trucking with those sequins.
Yeah, well, I mean, this kind of answers what I was going to ask you next, but as a practical tip, what is a something that you could offer listeners who want to learn how to sew but maybe are a little intimidated? Or what would be the first project you would assign?
Yeah, I think that sometimes doing something as simple as having a garment that you like, whether it be a pair of pants or a tank top or underwear or whatever it is that you like the fit of, and say it's just old or you're over it, like put marks on it of where all the seams are and cut the whole thing apart, lay it flat, and look at how it was put together. And then
Mm.
just try with crappy fabric to put it back together, making a pattern off the original. And I think that that's a nice it's very satisfying. I'm sure you felt this when you started doing that. I would imagine that you maybe use that technique a couple times because that's how I did most of my work.
Oh, yes.
And it's so satisfying when you all of a sudden arrive at like a brand new garment that's in a cool fabric that fits the way you want it to.
Hmm.
Um, so that's what I would suggest. I'd say do something small and do something easy, or even kind of you can catch the bug for costuming by even just embellishing something that already exists by stitching or gluing or adhering, whatever you want to it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's yes. And I actually that's a good reminder too, because I that is what I used to do, especially for underwear, or I go to like a blue sex store and buy like a really cheap, slutty, badly constructed thing and take it apart and then, still make it slutty, but just out of nicer fabric.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think to myself, I used to, there was like one pair of underwear that I loved. I cut it apart, made a pattern from it. And then I was like, oh, I could probably turn it into a brief instead of a trunk. And then you could also just cut the ass out. And then you could do a rip away this. You could do it's like there's so many variations. Once you have an understanding of like the base of it all, then you can alter it any way you want.
Yeah. And listeners, if you want a pair of form-fitting briefs or trunks that hug the curves and mounds of your butt and also give your crotch a nice padded full feeling, I highly suggest checking out a pair of Gorgeous by Gorgeous.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I try to lift and support, and it's fun. I have to say, one thing that is really fun, this also goes along with the whole pride thing. I sell a lot of work online throughout the spring and summer specifically, and it's a lot of times people buying these like shiny, fun, trunks, boy short, whatever you want to call it, underwear, and they wear them on cruise ships and to pool parties and whatever. And I also know that there's a lot of like non-gay people that do that. So whether you're gay or not, I think it's really fun to see someone wear something that makes them feel kind of playful and fun and special and unique. And I guess the older I get and the more performing I do and the more costuming I make, the more I realize like my day-to-day life is like jeans and a t-shirt.
Hmm.
Like I'm not one of those people that you see walking down the street and you're like, look at that fabulous person, like wearing a hot pink mesh tank top with flowers glued on it. And they're like carrying their Trader Joe's bag going to the grocery store. That's not me. That's never been me. But I will say, as I get older and have done more of this, I'm like, yeah, why can't I wear something fun all the time? And when I see people buy these pieces or wear them, it's like I realize they're not performers. They're not whatever. And to have something kind of fun and flashy is just kind of liberating,
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. I'm actually
you
glad
know?
that I'm glad that the first recording was lost. This is also beautiful.
Yeah, because that was a garbage recording.
Right. You sounded like shit on that first one. So this
Yeah,
is
well, I was in the bathroom the whole time, so I apologize.
really quickly. I just have a few questions left for you, but can you talk about the Broadway musical that you designed?
Yeah, so I didn't design it. It was designed, I did construction for it. So, which is like, in general, it's kind of all the same thing because these two amazing designers, Reid and Harriet, designed the show Dancin'. It was a Bob Fosse revival. Dancin' was on Broadway for years, way back when. And they brought it back to the old Globe Theater in California. And then it came to Broadway this past spring. And they redesigned all the pieces and asked me if I'd take on some of the workload. So I did about 30 pieces for the show, and they were all stretch, a lot of mesh, lycra, spandex pieces. But you know, what's interesting, it was my first time working on a Broadway show and my first time working with a design team. And there is a little bit of that gray area. I mean, they were incredible where the sketches were so detailed, but
Mm,
there is that kind of gray area of like, how do you interpret it as a builder, like as a maker?
hmm.
So there were some like definitely some design elements that I would suggest or have question about, but the process was interesting and it was stressful because I was trying to really hold myself to this like Broadway costuming standard. And it was that second guessing of like, well, is the way I do it good enough? Is the
Mm.
way I do it the way it's supposed to be done? And it was again a time I had to remind myself, like, don't get hung up on the technical process. Just understand the what's needed in the costuming and the best way to finish it so it looks like stage ready.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing. I just, like I was saying, it's really incredible, like having friends in this entertainment industry for so long and just seeing like all the new things that everybody is doing. So, congrats again.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
You also perform as your alternate personality, the drag queen Shanana Splits. What made you want to explore drag?
Well, I think part of it was just out of the fun of being a different personality, a different character. I mean, I think drag in general is so glamorous and it's like such a an avenue of like just total creative. I think I started to paint myself into a box a little bit as like who is Mr. Gorgeous? Like what would he do? It's got to be funny, it's got to be a dumb visual, it's got to be this. I have to take my clothes off. And I thought like, well, why don't I just do something a little bit different where I can set a different set of rules for myself. And it also just started, you know, I worked in Provincetown for many summers with Kitten LaRue and Lou Henry Hoover. And one night I was like, I just want to be in full drag and go out after the show. And like, and I just fell in love with like you feel like you're a different person. You feel like you have a different energy and a different sass. And that was just so fun. I kind of fell in love with that experience. And then I just started to come up with a bunch of ideas for acts that I would want to do and like who this character was. And yeah, I don't know. It was fun. I didn't feel nervous to fail because I was like, whatever, you know, just do it. Who cares?
Yeah. I remember some of the first time seeing you in drag. You look like Kitten LaRue's Amazonian daughter. I mean, like
Yeah.
gorgeous and like 8 fucking feet
But
tall.
well, thank you. I mean, she was the first person to put me in makeup, and her and Ben, you know, years ago, actually in Seattle was my first time. And you know, it's like when they say like, "Oh, my drag mother" or my whatever. It's like I always, not always, but prior to that, I was like, "Oh, I get it," but like, you know, it's like must be like just like friends. But there is a whole sense of support and uh fun and growth and things that you learn, and it's not even so much just about like someone teaching you how to do makeup or how to like push, you know, put your padding in right. It's beyond that. It's more of like the conversation that happens in between, that you have such a connection with someone and you have such a conversation and just the fun of the process that I completely understand why people have like this house of drag or this mother or that thing, or it's like a totally different family support system that happens.
Hmm.
Um, and it's so fun. It's so cool. I'm so, you know, lucky to have had that experience as well.
Yeah, that just made me think because it's not necessarily, I guess, quote unquote, normal for people to have like burlesque mothers or daddies or whatever, more like sugar daddies. But do you feel like you had a burlesque parent?
Well, I would say definitely, you know, Trixie Little and Evil Hate Monkey, I mean, were really the two that kind of took me under their wing and really would show me the ropes of what we wanted to do. I remember like my first real job was at the Hustler Club with them. It was Catherine Delish was headlining. It was at the Hustler Club, and I got to enter for my act on a two-story stripper pole on the Hustler Club stage. We did that together, followed directly by doing the Norwich Norfolk Fringe Festival in England. Like, I mean, I did so many things from an early point on that are definitely thanks to them, and a lot of my growth was from working with them. So I would say certainly them, and then you know, in the more recent years, like 5, 6, 7 ish years, you know, Kitten and Lou are my like definite. I have many. I don't want to exclude anyone, but they're definitely two of like my partners in crime for sure. Not to mention all of Josh Dean, Ben Franklin, Jason Mejias, all my boys' night, Chuck Ragsdale who plays Eve Starr in our show. I mean, there's the circles kind of like family and burlesque are there are many, and they all have different roles and different moments in your burlesque career and performing career. But I've been very, very lucky to have had time with so many people in so many intimate, kind of close ways of both professional and personal.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really beautiful way of saying that. I just had to share before I move into one of my final questions here. So
Yeah.
when I can't remember what year this was at the Las Vegas Burlesque Hall of Fame, but my father and stepmother came to watch me perform, and we were talking about something, and then all of a sudden my dad's neck like snaps in this opposite direction, and I looked, and he was staring at you, and I could see like the wheels in my dad's mind like spinning, like sparks flying, being like, who is this person? Who am I looking at? And why am I so turned on? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's my friend, Mr. Gorgeous, who's that's a drag character he does called Shanana Splits. And like my dad like having to like snap back into reality again. It was
Oh my God. I love it. I love it. Well, it's so, it's just so fun. It makes me, I will say the one thing that makes me kind of sad when it comes to like politics, beyond the fact that, people are trying to take away the simple rights of all human beings. That aside, it makes me on a, more elementary note, like it's so disappointing people just can't have fun. Like
yeah.
I look at some of this and I'm like, man, life is too short and you're missing out. Put aside, these are very important things, but like all of the rights that are trying to be taken away, the laws that are trying to be made. But it's like on the very just the basic. It's like you can't even go out and have a good time and sit there and enjoy yourself at a drag show, a cabaret show, a burlesque show. Like how sad. I mean, that's the thing
Yeah.
that blows my mind just from a starting point of some of the things that are happening right now. It's just a lack of joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to be clear, my dad did have a great time. It just made me think in that moment, like, oh, sometimes you're touching the hearts and minds of straight men and you don't even realize you're doing it.
Yeah,
So,
and I was not at all trying to imply at all that your dad wasn't having fun. I mean, it was a wonderful, wonderful time. I'm just saying, like in general, when I'm thinking of like the world of what's happening right now in drag and
mhm.
trans rights and gay rights and women's rights, you know, it's just so upsetting. People can't just have a good time.
Yeah, and on top of that, that they're trying to take away, like, not even the good time, like you said, just, the basic human right to live and be left alone. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, amongst many others, we're skipping over, which I'm intentionally not getting into that because we'd be here for 4 more hours. I had
We
my input.
Exactly. We'd be here for 4 more hours, and you've got to make chicken soup, and I have a hungry cat.
Yeah.
Well, one of my last questions here is you have literally performed all over the world. You've headlined festivals across the US as far as Vienna, Finland, Berlin, London, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. I was wondering how do you see your burlesque career now, and what is something that you want to work on next on the horizon?
So good question. I feel like I'm starting to. It's like the volcano is about to erupt with like a new, not version of Mr. Gorgeous, but new work, new concepts, new visuals. I'm so lucky that I have such a supportive husband who encourages me to do all the creative things I want to do. And I feel like I have taken a step back a little bit from performing to really work on building the costuming business. And
Hmm.
I've been really busy with that. But I definitely miss new work and traveling international and even, in the States for performing. So I'm excited to kind of redo that. Another thing that I'd love to do one day is do really just like a stage show that just all it does is just present tons of new costuming.
Mm.
So I just want it to be almost like a gay costume exhibit, like Jubilee style. So it's just like a giant staircase that these like gorgeous costume pieces walk up and down on. And it's more of a dance, theatrical, comedic play with not much of a storyline that's just about the spectacle of costume. So I would love to work on that, and I'd love to make that a thing in the next few years. But that would be my other like creative build that I'm looking into.
Oh my God, I want to see that happen so badly. That would be perfect.
Yeah, we'll see. But I think it'd be fun.
Yes. And then you could have a couple of the testosterone dancers come out mid-show and just kind of like do a little jiggle dance and then go back in.
Exactly. Exactly. Like I think it would be, I mean, if I could be so bold as to say, like, if it had the smallest ounce of like a Mugler fashion show, how that was almost more of like just a full-on theatrical presentation. And he had the go-go dancers out there too, so who knows what'll happen? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're listening, Francisco, start stroking.
Yeah, go for it. I'll call you.
Mr. Gorgeous, where can people find you?
Oh, well, I'm not a Facebook person, and I'm not the best with social media, but if you ever check out my Instagram at Mr. Gorgeous, MR Gorgeous NYC, and my costuming Instagram is at gorgeous underscore by underscore gorgeous. Those are two of the best ways to find me and track me down.
Great. I will include all those links in the show notes. Well, look, friend, you are a huge source of inspiration for me. I adore you. I love you. And I literally have to look up to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Love you too. Great talking to you.
All right. Stay tuned next week for another riveting episode of Showboys, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Showboys. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you didn't like it,
you are a whore, darling.